good morning to all those who are residing in India, and to Sajesh, good evening. I'm very happy. I'm Father Roy Joseph Odakan. I'm the campus head right now in the Jyoti Engineering College. It's my pleasure to meet you all here in the webinar, and especially I do congratulate all the alumni members, those who are coordinating this program, wonderful program. We know that we are in the pandemic scenario, but information, knowledge sharing, everything that is happening in the webinar platform, thanks to internet. And I do believe always that, okay, we alumni are doing a lot of wonderful jobs, a lot of assistance to the younger generation. And I hope that you will be doing the same again and again for the coming future. So I'm not prolonging much. Sajesh, thank you very much for your kind heartedness to address all these people. Though you are so busy, I know it very well. But still, you still remembering the good old days that you were here on the campus. At the same time, those who are coordinating this program, all the very best. I may be leaving soon because I have another meeting. So all the very best, and God bless you. Sajesh, thank you very much on behalf of the entire Jyoti family, and Shiny Madam, Bipin, all the faculty members, those are coordinating this program. Okay, so good luck to all. God bless you all, and stay safe.
You, Father.
Thank you, Father.
Over to you.
Thank you, Father. You have nice words. Thank you, Father.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Good morning. I hope I'm audible.
Yes,
It's wonderful to hear your friends talk again. So I'm Ashwini Nambudri, S7EC student of Jyoti Engineering College, Thrissur. Welcome to the webinar on strategies to build a successful professional career, jointly organized by Jyoti Engineering College Alumni Association and Department of Placement and Training. In this lockdown period, we are all busy improving our skill set and looking for opportunities. And I'm sure we couldn't have had a better person to guide us through this than our guest today, Mr. Sajesh KV. Mr. Sajesh KV is a Jyoti alumni 2002 to 2006 ECE batch. He began his career as a technical recruiter and has worked with clients like Microsoft, Nike, and IBM, and has been HR at Infosys. He currently works as Technology Director, Engineering Project Manager on site at Google San Francisco. We heartily welcome you, sir.
Thank you. And there's no sir, it's always Sajesh. That's the easiest way to kind of.
Okay.
All right. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt when I first started, but I've broken this into a few different things. I briefly want to talk about, who am I, right? There's about 88 people in here. There's a lot of people who I know really well. I've studied with. I've kind of followed their lives. So I wanted to basically introduce myself, talk about a few things in terms of how to build your career. I know right now it's a very difficult time in everybody's lives. It's not something that people have seen before, maybe during the Second World War to some extent, but who knows, right? None of us were around at that point. But I'm a very strong believer that there's always light at the end of the tunnel and there's always a way out. It's just how you look at it. The expression of looking at a glass half full versus half empty, and I've always looked at it half full. The second part of it is more towards in terms of, identifying where you want to be, right? Like a career is not just, most of you are like 19, 20, 21 years old. The plan isn't like, hey, I want to get on a job, spend 30 years in the job or retire. Maybe some of you have that plan. Or it's not like, hey, what I want to do for the next 2 years, right? You're thinking 10 years, 15 years or 20 years. Sorry. So the second aspect or the second part of this session is going to cover in terms of how do you really build towards that, right? And the last aspect is essentially in terms of, what opportunities are out there, how do you get to those opportunities, and how can I be of help at the end of the day? So let me quickly start with like the who. So one of the things that I want to really start with, right? Like most of you have been in engineering for about 3 years. What do you think is the biggest learning that you've had in engineering? And this is a question that I revisit every 5 years, every 10 years, because after my engineering, I took like a deviated path. I kind of stepped away from engineering till recently. I kind of recently took up an engineering PM role, and I'm back to kind of being in an electronics lab and an electrical lab and things like that. But for 15 years, I stayed in touch with technology, but I kind of moved away. But there's one thing that kind of stayed with me in terms of And that's what the question that I always answer when people say, hey, what's the biggest benefit of your engineering degree, right? And the one thing I say is you learn to solve problems. Like however you look at it, whatever branch you've studied in, that's the essence that you gain from it. Is you will learn to solve problems, and if you can keep that mindset, that's a big plus in terms of what field you want to go to. So who am I, right? So I think Ashwini briefly kind of introduced me. So my this part of my life started on August 14, 2006. I had actually interviewed for a call center job with Dell, and I had got rejected in the final round. It was an interesting question that I was asked. I was asked saying, hey, if you're the team lead, and if somebody in your team doesn't like you, right? How would you deal with it? And my response was, if somebody doesn't like me, I'm going to have a conversation with them, find out what are the reasons for them not liking me. And if it's something on my end that's a mistake, I'd like to kind of have the conversation with them. And I don't mind compromising to that extent. So I was rejected on the pretext that, as a leader, you should never compromise. And to this day, I hold that, I made the right decision. A week later, when the rest of my batch passed out, I had about 20 backs, 20 supplementary exams. So for most people on this call, you have 1 year more to where I was, and you at least have that advantage that you can relook at life. Like you can start today and then change it over, because there's always a way out. I started on my first job in 2006, October 9th. It's interesting because I didn't know what job I was interviewing for. I was basically with a friend 140 kilometers from Cochin, and then this friend said, hey, there's this company that's interviewing. Why don't we head over there? It was about 4 p.m. when we got there. Like I said, I had no clue about what the job was. I missed the initial session because I found out about this interview process late. And then I was interviewing till about 10 p.m. that night. I was one of the last ones to interview that day. There were about 400 people in that session. So the only thing they were asking or focusing on was puzzles. I had to answer about 5 or 6 puzzles, and then they were like, hey, you know what? You got through these 6 puzzles. Why don't you come back tomorrow morning? And I was like, sure. And then I was like, should I prepare on something? So they were like, hey, it'll be good to kind of prepare on the basics of Java, object-oriented programming, C++. I had exposure to all of those technologies, but I didn't know beyond that. So I kind of got back to Cochin about 10:30 in the night, went to an internet cafe, kind of did a basic research on these concepts and things like that. And then next day morning, I turned up at 8 o'clock again for the interview. So at the end of the day, they offered me a job. There were about 6 people hired from 400. And I still didn't know the job. So a week later, I get a call from HR and say, hey, congratulations. You've been selected to join Aditi Technologies. Aditi is a gold partner for Microsoft. You will be a technical recruiter. And I had no clue what that meant. So I was like, okay, what will I be doing? And they said, hey, you'll be working night shifts. You'll be, working on hiring people for Microsoft. So your job is to find this talent from the market using job portals. And then essentially, once you find a candidate, you speak to the candidate, and then you kind of pass it over to the hiring manager. And then the hiring manager essentially makes a decision on the candidate. I was like, sure, right? What do I have to lose? I don't have any other options. But I did tell them saying, hey, you know what? I have a few back papers. I have not completed my engineering. I will complete it no matter what it takes, but I need some time. And they were like, sure, that's fine. I mean, as long as you do end up completing your education, we're okay with it. So that's essentially how I started it. I spent about 2.5 years on that job. The job was in Bangalore. I had a lot of friends around, basically from college. The job was fun. It paid really well. And essentially, it was an extension of college life. But the interesting aspect is I spent about 17 hours every day at work because I wanted to be the best at what I was doing. And I had a big regret that I did not put enough effort in engineering. To date, I kind of think of the fact that the only reason I didn't do engineering well was because I just thought I was smart and I took it for granted, and I did nothing about it. So that's my first lesson to everybody on the call, that you might be really good at what you to, you might be really smart, or you might look at others and say, hey, they are really smart, it's easy for them. It's not easy for anybody. So the people who do really well in studies and in whatever field they are, it's because they put a lot of effort. And so that's the one thing that you have to kind of carry through your career, that, if you start taking it easy or you take things for granted, somebody else is going to get better than you, right? So I spent about 2.5 years there, and then I ended up completing my engineering in 2008. So I would kind of keep taking time off, going back, writing my exams, coming back, getting back to work. And then I got to a very comfortable position where I was like, hey, I like this job, I like the environment, I like the people around. But then I had this nagging feeling that if I stayed there, I would not grow to the next level. So I decided to make a move, and I made a move to Delhi for an organization I didn't know about. The only reason I made the move was because they also just started supporting Microsoft as a client, and I felt that I could add more value based on my experience that I had with working with Aditi for about 2.5 years. So I made the shift to Delhi in the middle of April. So the day I landed, it was about 42 degrees, and I just wanted to go back. I was like, why would I make a move from Bangalore, where I was happy, I had friends, to Delhi, where I knew nobody? The weather was terrible. I found it hard to deal with people. And then the environment was very different because people in northern part of India are very aggressive. It's not like working in Bangalore. And just to give comparison, right? So in my team in Bangalore is very small. We are only about 20 people. The company that I worked with, Artec in Delhi, they had about 350 people on the floor. And it was essentially like walking into the New York Stock Exchange. Phones were ringing, people were loud, you could hear people around. And this is middle of the night because it was night shifts, right? So a couple of months later, I was like, I'm done. I'm just going to leave. There's no way I can survive here. And then the manager there, or he was essentially the senior manager, and now he's like a VP there in that organization. I've always looked at him as one of my mentors. He said, hey, you know what? Give it some time. It's a different environment. It's a good company to work for, but it will take time. So I said, fine, sure, right? Why not, right? I've already made the investment of traveling over. So I spent another 2 months, and then they had this opportunity that opened up in the Redmond, Seattle office in the US to support Microsoft as an account manager on site. And they were like, hey, you seem to have the communication skills, you know the account well enough. Why don't you try sales or account management, right? And I was like, sure. I have never considered myself to be a salesperson, but the opportunity is good. So I came to the US, spent about 5-6 months, at the end of which they wanted to kind of have me stay longer, but then I was still in that mindset that, hey, I need to be close to family. My family's in Kerala. I have friends in Bangalore. So I moved back with the same company in Bangalore. I spent another year there, supporting their India business. So essentially like day shift, but I was supporting their IBM as a client. Artec's IBM's largest staffing supplier. And when I say staffing, it's recruiting. It's like, what do you say, an agency that recruits for these larger clients. And that's something that I've always stressed on as a career path. I know a lot of people don't think of moving to HR after an engineering degree, but you will have a lot of value add over everybody else. And the biggest value add is that you understand technology from some sense. So when you speak to a candidate with any level of experience, you can at least hold a conversation about, hey, you have a background in software engineering, right? Or you have a background in electronics. What have you done? So you can at least hold that conversation. You know technology from that extent, where you don't have to code, but you understand it well enough. So I spent another year there. And in 2011, I said, well, you know what? I feel I've grown enough. I kind of know a lot. I should essentially be doing a lot more. So I joined a startup, which is, startups were trending. This was right after the 2009 recession, and people were scared to leave jobs. And I was like, why not, right? Like, I am in my mid, 25, 26 years old. I was like, if I can't take a risk now, when will I take that risk? So I joined this startup, and it was a very different environment because on my first day at work, they said, hey, we had hired about 15 people 3 months ago. Here's a list of 10 people that we want you to fire. I had managed smaller teams like of 2 and 3 people, but to kind of walk into a new job and on your first day get a list of people you want to fire, it's a very interesting experience, right? So I said, sure, why not, right? I mean, I don't have a lot of information, so I brought each person in, and all of these people were like freshers out of college, a couple of years older than you guys. And I said, hey, you know what? This job didn't seem to work for you guys. You know, there's a lot of opportunities. You're still young. I can probably provide references, and you know, we can go from there. And so the next day, you know, the top 4 performers of the team came and said, hey, you know, we want to quit our jobs because we don't feel there's job security. So essentially in 2 days in my new job, I lost 14 out of 18 people that I was initially given. And that was my first experience really working with hiring people like fresh out of college, interviewing people, and then training them on skills in terms of skills like life skills, right? How to kind of essentially build your career in terms of what are things you want to focus on, how do you demonstrate your strengths, how do you know learn of your weaknesses, how do you work with feedback. And I still stay in touch with a lot of them, and you know, some of them have really done well in their careers. So I did that for about 11 months, and then the interesting thing is I have not interviewed for a job since May 2011, because every single job that I've had after has been a reference from a client or from somebody I know from the industry. And that's something I'm going to keep emphasizing is, you know, in terms of build your network and keep in touch with your network. That's definitely a success factor in terms of growing or building your career, is stay in touch with people. You know, there's always somebody you can reach out to from your past who might be able to help you with something 10 years down the line. And that's the essence of alumni, right? That, you know, there's a group that you stay in touch with. I'm going to kind of move really quickly forward, sorry. So in April 2012, one of my first managers, or my first manager for my first job, she basically got a role with Infosys as global head of talent acquisition. And she was building a team from scratch to improve Infosys hiring practices, because Infosys, I mean, at that point, they had about 30,000 people across the globe. And their methods of hiring wasn't the most optimal in terms of how the tools they used, the resources they used. So my job, my experience, expertise till that point had been in building, recruiting teams from just essentially nothing. So she kind of hired me on the team. And it's interesting because Infosys, with whatever level of experience you have, they always need 60% aggregate. And then, you know, there's always a limit of the number of back papers that you could have had in your entire 4-year engineering degree. So I had to kind of go through about 3 levels of approvals to get in the job, because my aggregate was about 59.6. And I mean, it's like your past, right? You can't erase it. It stays with you. So I was with Infosys for about 1.5 years. The benefit that I had with Infosys is that I was a part of a team that really could change things around and, you know, make an impact, because it's a large company. And, you know, when you pick your career, and this is something I want to address in the next slide, it's always important to know where you fit in. Like, it's not a large company, not for everyone. Small companies are not for everyone. Startups are not for everyone. So you have to really kind of find what is your comfort zone, because if you're somebody who wants to, you know, who wants to kind of take action, who has an opinion, you know, you have ideas, you want to present those ideas, you will get lost in a large company. So even the largest, right? Like, I mean, if I had to put the top 3 on the list, I would say Google, Microsoft, Facebook for me. All 3 companies just about the same. So I spent about 1.5 years. You know, it was really good. And then when I was leaving, the head of talent acquisition for Infosys across the globe, his name is Sushant Tarapan. So he called me into a room and he said, hey, you know what, you've done well in your career, but essentially in the 6 years that you worked, or 7 years that you worked so far, you've had 3 jobs, you've stayed in a job only for 2.5 years. Every job you've gone and you've built something and you've walked away from it, and you've never been able to really kind of reap the benefits of it. But if you want to really move into like higher level management, you have to spend at least 5 to 6 years in your next job. And then if you are able to build something out in the first two years, then you can really kind of see the benefits of that over the course of the 6 years. So at that point, Artec, that the company that worked in Delhi, they wanted to hire somebody in their California office, and so they, hired me back. And it was an interesting period because I was waiting for about 6 months to get my visa approved, and I got my visa approved. And the day I was supposed to travel, I tore my ACL. So the ACL is an interesting ligament in your knee that supports your knee, and the whole thing kind of got shifted by about 5 or 6 months. And again, there's always positives what come out of it. Because I stayed for a little longer, my visa approval process went a little smoother, and there's another story to it. But essentially, at Artec, when I came back, I was handed their Google account in the California office. They had so just to give you a size of, Artec's a $1 billion company, $850 million. So it's large. They have about 8 offices in the US. They work with India, US, and China, and then they support IBM, Microsoft, any company that you can think of. They support them as a primary vendor, as a primary staffing or recruiting supplier. And on the Google program, they had been there for about 10 years, and they had not grown beyond like a $3 million revenue program. In the 6 years that I was there, $3 million program, there were about 5 people working, and I was the only account manager. When I left them in March, it was $50 million, and we had a team of about 40 people. And I had a reporting structure where there were at least 10 people that reported into me directly, and then I had the other 40 offshore that reported into me. And the biggest thing I learned about is how to build a large structure, and essentially with people like you, right? In terms of people who fresh out of college, you train them on certain skills, build them up to the next level, and then some of them, there's each one has different aspirations. So some might leave after a year, some might leave after 2 years. But I know people who've stayed there for 5 years and they've seen themselves grow. So, like I said in the beginning, right? It's a marathon that you're running. You're not thinking 1 year, 2 years. Always think 10 years, 20 years, and beyond or less, depending on how well you do. But essentially, I left Artec in April. I was doing really well. I was very happy. But then this one of my clients at Google actually referred me to an engineering PM role, and I really wanted to get close to technology. And I feel there is no other company as good at it and as rapid at it as Google is. So in terms of, I essentially today work with some of the critical business teams at Google within the Google hardware structure. And so I'm one of those very few people who have been going into work since April, although the pandemic has meant that 90% of Google employees do not have to come back to office till next year. I've been going at least 2 or 3 days a week. And over the last 5 months, I've been able to kind of really spend my time in terms of, I'm working on a project management certification. I'm actually working on releasing a book in a couple of years. And so I've been kind of doing some work on that, and also learning some coding and some general skills. I hope I haven't taken too much time on this slide, but the essence is there's always a point where you might feel comfortable in what you do. And like I said, it's up to you, but keep challenging yourself, keep giving yourself, something higher to aspire, because through your career, like, when you're in school and in college, the biggest comparison is always with somebody else saying, hey, this person's doing so well, why are you not doing it? The way I look at it with your career, you are the only benchmark. So 15 years from today, your only comparison is, hey, where was I today? Where am I going to be in 15 years? It's not going to be like, hey, where were your friends in 15 years back? Where are they now? Because each one chooses a different path. I'm going to just pause for a second. Anybody, any questions, anything before we move to the next slide? Okay, excellent. All right. So this is a very interesting slide. And this is something I use with all the teams, with anybody who I've interviewed. I always, I have a deck of cards, about 32 cards. This is only about 20. And every single person I've interviewed in the last 3 or 4 years, I've always kind of given them the cards, and I say, hey, take a minute, go through these cards and tell me, what do you relate as your top 3 values? And like I said, for each person, it could be different, right? For somebody like Srikanth, entrepreneurship, I have seen that, like, when I walked into my first first day of engineering and met Srikanth, I knew that Srikanth would want to be a career engineer. Like his only purpose was to become an engineer and kind of continue in it with engineering, which was very different from everybody else who had got to the class because, you know, they were like, hey, let's try engineering. Let's see how that works, right? This is very important. You have to know what your values are. And the reason why I say that is, you know, I'm going to go back to the entrepreneurship example, right? Let's say you feel that, hey, you know, I am somebody who wants to start a business. I want to, you know, do something of my own. If you say that and then you walk into a corporate, your life will be miserable because for the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, you will not be able to contribute anything of value or very little of value. And then you're going to be in a frustrated state of mind. For another example, right? Let's say if you feel you're somebody who's like, hey, trust is the biggest thing for me. I like to trust the people I work with, the people I know, and the people around me. And you walk into a team where, you know, people don't trust each other. Everybody has their selfish interest. You're going to struggle. So it's good to kind of really identify your values very early in your career because it starts reflecting on it. And then there's things that you pick up, you know, you kind of probably work with a certain set of people. It's like how you pick values from family, friends, society, right? So there's things that you pick up and you kind of improve. So for me, for example, the two biggest things that I've always held is integrity and adaptability to change. Integrity, because I feel that if at any point of time I don't reflect integrity, that's not something you can regain or, you know, take it back. Okay, sorry. I'll just go back to presenting my screen. Okay, it's back on. Yeah, and the other thing is adaptable to change, which I feel is very important for me because that's the reason I've been able to kind of do what I've done is every time I've been put in a difficult situation, I've been able to kind of change according to the situation and I've been able to adapt to it. So, you know, think about this, you know, whenever you get time, think about what your values are and where, you know, how do you want to kind of continue with it. The one question, and there's a great reference to it with the Steve Jobs video where, you know, I think in 1997 when he rejoined Apple and he was really building their value back with the iPhone, somebody asked him that and somebody said, hey, you know, what is Apple's biggest Apple's biggest value, right? And how many values can you have? And I mean, you can have 1, 2, 100, 150 values, but the essence is if you do not display those values consistently, people will not acknowledge those values. And Apple's biggest value at that point, like he said, was creativity. He said, you know, we want to be known for our creativity. And that's how the company grew from where they were to where they are today. And then they have kind of stalled in the last few years because they have not been able to get really creative about it. So to identify this, right, there's an experiment which it's called the Johari window. I don't know if a lot of you are exposed to it. There's this 4 quadrants. There's the arena, there's the blind spot, there's the facade, and there's the unknown. And the easiest way I can explain this is imagine walking to a hotel and you know the menu. Like this is the hotel that you've always been to. There's things you like on the menu that you always order. That's your arena. Like your friends know that you know, I walk into a hotel, I'm going to order a biryani. My friends know that. So that's an arena. It's known to me, it's known to my friends. There's something called the facade, which like I might have a food allergy that my friends don't know about, right? It's something that I know and I try, let's say, you know, if I eat prawns, I have an allergy, I'm not going to eat it. And people might be like, hey, why are you not eating it? And I'm like, I don't know, I don't like it, right? Blind spot is what others see in you, but you don't see it. That's essentially how the whole feedback cycle comes in, right? In terms of, it could be something that it's a weakness that you don't realize, but people say, hey, you know what? This person has a temperament issue. He always gets angry. He's short-tempered. And you don't realize it. Like you, for the longest time, you might be like, hey, you know what? I'm just having a general conversation. I don't realize that I raise my voice when I speak to a larger group, right? That's your blind spot. And the unknown is essentially something that you haven't found out yet. You know, your friends don't know that about you. You haven't experienced that about yourself. So that could be something on the menu that none of you have tried and you don't know whether you like it or not. So over a period of time, right, the arena and the facade grow. The arena because, you find out things about yourself, you find out about your skill sets, you build more skill sets, you learn things, you borrow skills from others. And your facade is more like, your weaknesses, but you don't want others to see it. You kind of make sure that you always cover up your weaknesses and you already, have it over, right? So the arena and the facade are the quadrants that should really grow in your career over a 10, 15-year period, because you should reduce your blind spot and your unknowns. Like if you're at 40 years old and you're still trying to find out, hey, you know what? I don't know what all abilities I have or what all talents I have. Again, 40 might not be too old, but the sooner you get to that point and make the arena really big, that's how you become successful. And that's how you really can project your skills and learn your skills and things like that. Okay, coming to the how. The next part of it is my most interesting conversation. This is a conversation I usually talk to people who've been working, who have at least 1 year of experience, 2 years of experience. A lot of what I'm saying right now might not make sense, and that's one reason I'd kind of done I'd sent across a form to kind of get some feedback. I know there wasn't a lot of time for you guys to respond to it, but the next aspect of it is what I want you guys to think of when you get into a job. Like, how do you really build on your career? How do you really kind of focus on getting better at what you do? There's essentially 4 aspects of it. People, process, metrics, and technology. This is essentially from operational excellence, which is a manufacturing concept. So any industry that deals with manufacturing will always have something called operational excellence and Six Sigma. And this is a huge concept. If you can get these 4 things right in terms of whatever job you do, you can essentially be successful in no matter whatever field you pick. You can start a company of your own. You can work for a larger organization. You can work for a smaller organization, but keep these fundamentals in mind. The first thing, right? People. So again, this is a scientific concept called 6 degrees of separation. It essentially means that you can be connected to Bill Gates through six connections of yours. So it's like, think of it from a Facebook concept, right? Like I have a friend on Facebook who has a friend, who has a friend, who has a friend. The 6th friend ideally will be Bill Gates. And it's scientifically proven. The interesting aspect is if you can bring him to like 4, then your circle is more prominent. And then, there's a lot more value that you can add there. So a classic example with people, right, in terms of is LinkedIn, for example. LinkedIn's a social networking or professional networking site. And for example, if you have 10,000 connections on LinkedIn, and you can be connected to anybody, right? And each of these 10,000 connections have 10,000 connections. That's about 10 lakh connections, which means you can pretty much cover most of the entire workforce that's available. And so the way to do it is what I said earlier, right? Like you stay in touch with the people you know, you kind of make new connections, and then you kind of follow their career path, and then you'll be able to kind of get connected to others. And the other interesting thing about people is that, so I was at a friend's place and I was playing cards, and they said, hey, one of our cousins just moved from India. He works at Google too, and I was like, great, it's nice to know somebody that might be working in a different part of the organization that I support. So I started talking to him. His name is Sandeep Menon, and he was like, yeah, I recently moved from Delhi to San Francisco. I work with marketing and all of that. And afterwards, when I went back and researched on him, Sandeep Menon was the head of marketing for Google across India, which means he was 2 levels below Sundar Pichai. So essentially, over a single connection, which I'm like my friend's friend, I was 2 connections away from Sundar Pichai. And that's something that you should always, always remember. Stay connected with the people that you know, with your college mates, with your friends, because it will always pay back to you in the future. And even in your corporate life, if you can work with people from any background, and be flexible about it, you can get a lot further than not being able to work with people. The second concept is called the Flywheel Effect. This is part of process. So I'm sure you recognize the gentleman who is in the picture. So the flywheel is like a huge 50 50 feet disc, right? And the concept of the flywheel is you keep pushing at the flywheel. After a while, and we are all engineers in here, right? After a while, what happens is you don't need to push anymore, and the flywheel starts running on its own. But till the time you get to it, you have to keep pushing. You have to get others to push with you, and when the flywheel starts moving on its own, you don't really know what action of yours really helped with that. So if you start pushing in a certain way, like if you're pushing it like forward, you keep pushing it forward till it moves forward, right? It's not like you push it forward for a while, stop, and then you start trying to pull it, and then expect it to kind of run on its own. So the reason why Jeff Bezos is connected with the Flywheel Effect is because the author of the book called The Flywheel Effect, Jim Collins, met with Jeff Bezos in 2001. Amazon was about $3 billion. They were selling books, and they were running losses of about 550 million. So Jim Collins told Jeff Bezos, saying, hey, you know what? You have to build a concept, you have to build a process, and you have to stay with it. Try improving it, try to get that process to basically pay for itself. And once you start selling books, for example, you'll get to a point where people start buying from you. They like what they buy from you, right? Then you can start selling other stuff on it. You can make it a marketplace. So essentially, gave him the concept of it. Amazon's worth $320 billion today in roughly about 20 years. And this is a very big concept when I kind of mentioned what I did in my last job, how I grew it from $5 million to $15 million, because the one thing I've emphasized on was this in terms of, hey, it's 5 of us, let's push, let's keep doing the same thing. Let's keep improving that. Let's kind of see, what changes we can make. And if the system's broken, then we'll try to fix it. Else we'll stay with it. And that's something that is very useful to you once you start on your career, in terms of, keep at a process till it's broken, but also start, be on track with it in terms of, what improvements can you make, what else can you do, right? But how do you learn how to make an improvement, or how do you kind of know that you have to take the next step? And that's the third aspect called metrics, right? My slide's taking a second to load. So the biggest benefit that all of you have and all of us have in today's world is the amount of data. 30 years ago, there was no data on anything. If you wanted to kind of ask, we barely had computers. Then we had storage. The storage increased. And today, in any field of work, it could be sport, it could be business, it could be finance, it could be the entertainment industry, right? In terms of how they kind of have blockbusters, everything is based on numbers. And essentially, in terms of how do you take a few data points and convert that to wisdom and make intelligent decisions? Whatever task you do, whatever job that you do, it's good to kind of have a tracking mentality to it, in terms of analyze it, saying, hey, the simplest thing, right? Your finances. You can be thinking, saying, hey, I get pocket money of 1,000 rupees a month. My expenditure is about 800 rupees. How do I kind of continue to save that 200 rupees? And how do I kind of invest that 200 rupees? And I know it's a very different conversation from when I was in college, because I know that college students today invest in crypto coins, and we barely knew how to kind of spend 200 rupees on anything apart from food. So metrics is very important. Like I said, whatever job you get into the habit of tracking data. First, understanding what data points you can track, and then essentially tracking that over a period of time. You'll have enough sample data to basically say, okay, now I can make an intelligent decision based on the data I have. And there's a lot of tools available. There's Microsoft Excel, there's Google Sheets, there's anything that you want in terms of technology, right? So metrics is always important in terms of whatever job that you do. And then that essentially brings me to the fourth concept, right? The technology. The technology that you have available today is unbelievable. And what is going to happen in the future is going to be even better. And let me walk you through a scenario which could be my life essentially today, right? I wake up in the morning, the phone rings, there's an alarm, and then it starts reading out the news to me. It knows exactly what kind of topics I follow. So once I get to know the news, By the time I come down, the temperature in the house is adjusted on its own, because Google had bought a company called Nest a few years ago that makes the smart thermostats. By the time you're done with that and you step out of the house, there's a self-driving car. Google basically owns a self-driving car called Waymo. It's basically something that they've started, and they have some of them running on the roads. It's not out there for the public yet, but you basically step out of your house. There's a car waiting for you. Get in the car. Your phone knows where you work, so it essentially directs the car to that workplace. Once you get there, you have your work. When you come back, by the time you get back home, your house is at the temperature where you like to be, and your favorite music is playing because it's all tracked. So that's essentially the ecosystem that's happening with each of these companies that they're building. So it's always good to stay in touch with technology. You could be a civil engineer, you could be a mechanical engineer, you could be an architect, you could have nothing to do with technology, but make it a practice and a habit to stay in touch with technology, read about it, because at some point you might be able to leverage something for your job, even if you have nothing to do with a software engineering job. So always kind of stay in touch with technology, and it'll always pay out. Okay, I'm sure I've been talking for about 40 minutes now, and most people are like, what is he talking about? Like, this makes zero sense. We came in, we wanted to talk about, hey, how can I get a job, right? Like, what field of interest can I look at? Where can I apply for a job? And he's talking about something that makes zero sense, which is essentially why I wanted to bring this part of the segment to the end. What are the career opportunities you have in today's day, 2 years down the line, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line? No matter what, like, unless humanity ends, which I hope not, these career opportunities will always stay. And the reason why I say it is because the world will live in a different way, but they can't move away from these things. The first one's engineering. I'm sure the core engineering, electrical, electronics, civil, mechanical, they will not go away. They'll be far and few jobs. So if you really want to kind of focus your energy in getting a job within that space, you really have to be good at what you do, and you'll have to have the additional education. So if somebody's thinking of pursuing a master's or a PhD, it's a good way to get into it, and then you can kind of really pick a sweet spot in terms of what kind of engineering you want to do. So those jobs will stay; they will not go anywhere. UI UX is something that's really come out in the last few years. For somebody who has, like somebody in computer science engineering, but they don't really want to code, but they have a flair for like art or just like aesthetics, UI UX is a really good space. I have known friends, who work in large organizations who came from an architectural background and shifted to UI UX, and they've been able to do really well in that space. So it's one of those things where you can kind of move from any background. UI UX is essentially user interface and user experience. The simplest way to think of it is user interface is, let's look at Google Meet, the screen that we're looking at right now, right? It's a very, like, Google's products are very simple. It's like white, and then there's a few other colors, and then the person who designs it is essentially thinking in terms of the users. So as a user, do I like the fact that the meeting details is on the right? Would I like it better if it's on the left? And then the color of the microphone when it's unmuted, it's red with a little slash next to it, or can it be in a different way? How does the user interpret that, right? And user experience is more the entire experience of using a website. What happens when I click a certain button? What is the reaction that happens? The third thing is data science, and that's the reason I kind of did that little emphasis on data, is because data science is huge. As per recent reports, in the US alone, there's about 4,500 jobs, 4,500 jobs where they're unable to find talent, because the world's got to a point where from having no data, we have a lot of data. And now it's essentially, what can you do with the data that you have? So, I'm sure everybody's heard of concepts of big data and the whole cloud war with Amazon, Google, with Microsoft Azure, and how they're trying to kind of really master that. And there's also this other conversation about Facebook and Google, because they have our data in terms of everything that we post online, everything that we do. they have user data, and then how do they use that data to sell it to ads or to other companies that could, kind of reach out to you, right? So data science is a big field, and it's just going to grow in the next few years. Digital marketing. So there's an interesting thing. One of my first colleagues told me. He said there's only two kinds of jobs in the world. Either you create something of your own, or you sell something that somebody else has created. And so marketing has always been there, but with this whole pandemic and things shifting to a more online kind of mode within any field, like it could be within education, it could be within sales, retail industry, everything's moving to the online space. And so digital marketing is really going to pick up, and there's not going to be a lot more of the old school marketing tactics of billboards and flyers. So digital marketing is again a big space. I'm sure some of you might have YouTube channels, or might have invested, or you have seen friends who've grown with that space. So there's a lot of opportunity there, and with companies trying to kind of reduce the overheads by hiring large branding agencies and allowing smaller or individuals to basically use them as marketing tools, there's a space for it to grow. Operational excellence is what I kind of touched on, the PPMT, or the people, process, metrics, and technology. Essentially with manufacturing, right? Now, whatever happens, aeroplanes will still be there. People will still buy cars. People will still buy clothes. I mean, even if you don't have to have a lot of change of clothes at home, you still need that. And so operational excellence is a field that looks at how do you make things more efficient? How do you really improve? And that's the core for manufacturing. Online education. One of the people that I've really followed in the last few years is Byju's, because I've always wanted to do that. I've always wanted to set up, provide some sort of online education. And, I thought that concept was amazing. And especially with the pandemic, that space is really going to grow. So you'll have jobs within that industry. So it could be writing code for a company that does online education, or it could be kind of creating content, or it could be like, again, digital marketing for those companies, right? So that space is really going to take off. And if schools across the globe decide to move to a completely online education, then there's a lot of arena for opportunities there. And the last one is human resources. This one's close to my heart because I've been in that industry for 15 years. There's always going to be HR jobs because you will have to deal with people. And HR is a huge, it's got a lot of different parts to it. There's, recruiting talent or engaging in talent. There's, performance management. There's organizational development. There's a business partner. And over the last few years, HR has essentially moved from being a support function to more like a business, a decisive function, which means 10 years ago or 15 years ago, when I first started my career, if you were in HR, you didn't have a value in the larger organization because you were not bringing in revenue, right? Software engineers who work for clients, they were bringing in revenue for the company was growing. And so essentially it was like, hey, let's get a few people in HR so that they don't really, if anybody has an issue, if somebody doesn't like the drinking water, go back and talk to HR. It was that kind of a concept. But over the last few years, HR has really kind of got to a point where, again, it comes from data and analytics, where HR really looks at data and says, hey, you know what? We find that if we hire 30 people from Jyoti Engineering College from the certain batch, they seem to have a certain skill set, and they seem to be staying with the organization for 3 years, versus from another college where they only stay for 2 years. And so suddenly business is like, wow, that's like a big input. That's a lot of cost saving for us in terms of hiring somebody or replacing someone. So HR is always going to have a lot of opportunities. And again, there's a lot of different facets to it. You can always take an MBA, you can have an area of focus, and then you can go from there. I'm sorry, was somebody saying something? Is it talking? All right. Okay. I'm sorry?
Yes, suggest you continue.
Yeah, we're almost at the end of this. I think we're doing pretty much on time. What can I do for you, right? I've spoken for 51 minutes now. I've kind of spoken about a lot of things, and our essence as a human being is like, hey, what for me? I sat and attended the session for 15 minutes. What am I getting out of it, right? So there's a few different things that I can, or a few different ways I can help you. One is networking, right? In terms of if there's a certain area that you want to pursue in terms of, let's say, hey, Sajesh, I'm in Bangalore. I want to look for a certain job within a certain organization, or I'm going to meet this company. Do you know somebody there? I might know somebody from my network who might be at least able to kind of get you to an interview, or at least give you some insight about the job. And so networking is something that I've focused a lot through my career, and I can definitely help people. I've never turned down anybody when they reached out to me with something. If anything, I can check, and if I don't find anything, I'll at least go back and say, hey, I'm sorry, I couldn't find anything, but at least I'm going to try in doing that for you. Resume. This is a very important thing. When you go for an interview, you dress up well, you comb your hair, you get a haircut, polish your shoes, do everything right. So whenever I interview people, the first thing I ask is, I have a resume in front of them and I say, hey, are there any spelling mistakes or grammatical errors on your resume? And a lot of them are very confident. They're like, no. And I'm like, are you sure? Have you checked? And they're like, no, I'm pretty sure it's not there. And so a resume is a very important thing because people make a judgment on you without even seeing you. And so it's very important to have, to build the right kind of resume, to kind of really focus and emphasize on your strengths, on your skills, talk about any achievements that you have, and then make it believable. A lot of people would, so funny story. I've interviewed a lot of fresher engineering students for like HR roles. And the first thing I ask them when I look at the resume, I'm like, oh, electrical engineering student, excellent, excellent grades. I'm like, so you just graduated this year? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, what's Ohm's law? And I've been doing it till about 6 months ago. And it's always interesting what their reaction is, because they're like, but why should I know Ohm's law? I'm applying for an HR job. But I'm like, you were in engineering for 4 years, right? What is Ohm's law? And so some of them will say V equal to IR, which is interesting because that's not the law. It's the formula that's derived from the law. So whatever you put on your resume, be confident of speaking to it. And that's something that I really like to emphasize with people. If you put C++ and Java, somebody's going to ask you about OOPS concepts. And if you can't answer the difference between polymorphism and inheritance, most likely you will not get the job. So kind of be, that's something that I can do a resume workshop at some point and really kind of, give you tips in terms of what are things to focus on. But the basics are no grammatical errors, no spelling mistakes, and then just very clear, concise in terms of what you've done. And it's okay to say I don't have experience, but these are my skill sets, right? The third aspect is interviews. Over the last 14 years, I have prepped people for interviews, and at least 1,000 of them. And I'm not even throwing a number or exaggerating when I say this. At least 1,000 of them have got jobs with Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and IBM, because that's the companies I've focused on. Because you have to prepare for an interview. You cannot just show up and expect to do well based on your education, based on your previous, your previous experience. If you already have some experience and you're going for a new job, you always have to prepare for an interview. Interviews are different for different organizations. They look for different skill sets, and you have to really, prepare at least 6 to 8 hours before you go for an interview and be confident of getting or cracking the job, right? After that, if you don't get it, it's a different thing, but that's something that you should really focus on. Mentor and resources, in terms of if at any point of time, my LinkedIn information, I can share it. Feel free to reach out. I essentially respond to anybody who reaches out about anything. I'm on WhatsApp, I'm on calls, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm just everywhere. And I don't turn down anytime somebody says, hey, you know what? I want to apply for a master's program in UC Berkeley, which is a college here, or UC Davis, or one of the schools here. I want to kind of move to a new city. Do you have any information? I will be able to find something for you. I'll at least make an effort to kind of get that for you. And it's something that I've built myself to do it that way. So at any point of time, if anybody needs something, feel free to reach out. I'm not going to be like, hey, I'm sorry, I don't have time, I'm busy, because it's a process where if we don't give back to the people that, that come to us, tomorrow if I need something, people won't do the same to me, right? So that's something that you have to kind of learn and practice. So that's essentially what I can do for you guys is like, Shiny, we can talk about if you need us to do a resume workshop for like final year students, or if somebody wants to prepare for an interview and wants like an interview workshop, we can always kind of do that. The other thing about resources is, if somebody wants to get into data science and they're not really sure of how to go about it, I have friends, like I have a very good friend of mine who is the head of data analytics for Western Union. And, I've actually invited him on a couple of other sessions where I've basically brought him in to kind of talk to people about data science. Or I can have somebody talk to you about marketing or finance. So there's always people that I can check from the industry who are experts in their field. And they'd be more than willing to kind of do a session for you to get additional information. Okay, perfect. So I am probably almost at the end of this. And I'll probably stop for a few minutes and see if anybody has questions at the end of this slide. But there's a few fundamental things that I want you guys to remember. I mean, you might forget some of this. You might, never care about it. But I'm a big sports fan, so I kind of follow a lot of sports. I play a lot of sports. And for me, it's all about the rules of the game. Like, I'm somebody who follows it to the T. And I know that, when you're in your early 20s, it's very easy to kind of get distracted and say, I don't really care about the rules. If the rule says to wear a helmet when I ride a bike, why should I wear a helmet, right? Or if they say you should wear a mask, you're like, no, I'm healthy. Why should I wear a mask? There's a few rules of the game to be successful. And more often than not, people who don't follow it don't end up doing well. Again, there's always exceptions. I don't know if you know who Elon Musk is. Elon Musk is a founder of Tesla. He's an anomaly, but he's a genius, right? Like, the guy invented a car that runs on batteries. He basically launched a couple of people into space. So he's a different league. So unless you are Elon Musk, it's good to follow the rules. And like, when I go through the rules, I'll tell you a few interesting stories, because when I tell it to you, you might feel it's not applicable to me. It'll never happen to me. And unfortunately, I've been on the other end. When you're in HR, you kind of have to deal with a lot of people situations. And sometimes it's not fun. So the first rule of the game, right? Start somewhere. And the reason why I tell this to people is when you're 20, when you're 21 years old, you always think, I have the rest of my life. I have a lot of time, right? Start somewhere. I mean, you might not get your dream job today. You might not get your dream job 6 months down the line. But please start somewhere. Get on a job. Start working. Then start planning. You can always make those moves. But if you don't start somewhere and you keep waiting for that perfect thing to happen, it'll never happen. If you keep thinking that, hey, you know what? I want to be an IAS officer and, I have 3 turns and I'll keep preparing. In 3 years, it might not happen. So at least start working on a job. Then be like, okay, now I want to do my IAS. Let me allot time. Let me set these goals. And then let me work on it parallel. But please start on a job. The longer you wait, every year there are people who will take the jobs away. And so every day counts. Show up early, show up prepared. This is something that you should use in every facet of life. If you tell somebody I'll be there at 6 a.m., please be there at 5:45. And it's a very, there's a lot of jokes around it, like especially in the Silicon Valley, they talk about Indian stretchable time, because they say, you know what, if you invite an Indian, they're always late. And it's a very bad reference on us, right? Like, if you have a meeting, people show up late, and then people show up like they just woke up from bed. So you could, like I said, if you're playing a sport, you should always kind of make sure that you're always ahead of time, and you're warmed up, you're in a state of, you're already prepared for it. And when one of my previous classmates reached out to me about this presentation, I said, hey, I'd like to do something, and then she said, okay, they want a webinar and presentation deck. I was like, let me confirm with you, because I don't know if I can get around to doing it. And I spent about 7 hours on this for the entire presentation, preparing it, because if I kind of if I came to this meeting without being prepared, I'd feel really bad about it. So practice this. Please always be punctual. There's this general notion that if you're on time, you're actually late. So show up early, and you'll definitely have benefits of it. Attention to detail. I know I briefly touched on the resume aspect, but just in everything that you do, right? If you're sending an email to somebody, read through the email. There's always things that you might miss out. There's always like a spelling error, and it reflects on you as a person. So whatever you do, just make sure you double check it, triple check it, run like a spelling and grammatical check, but make sure that you've done it to the best of your ability and to the best of technology's ability, which means it should be perfect, because any mistake really shows up. And so it's very important that you're taking notes when somebody speaks, because if tomorrow you have a conversation, it shouldn't be like, well, I don't think I know what he said, or I don't know what he said in the beginning, and then he asked me about it and I wasn't sure. Respect everyone. So I play for a cricket team here. It's called Bad Boys. It's mostly Malayalis, which is one of the reasons why I joined the team, is to kind of have that social bonding. And there was this one player, he'd been playing with the team for like 5-6 years. Every time he'd turn up in an old hat, old clothes, an old car. And I mean, he would always be on time. He was a good player. He'd always do what you do, and then he would leave, right? And then he was just genuinely very nice, and we never spoke about anything beyond that. And so I had these bunch of really like young people who joined the team, and they just thought that they were above everybody else and they didn't have to respect anyone. And so they were having a conversation and they were very rude with him. So the next game, the guy shows up in the same clothes, but he shows up in a Rolls Royce. And suddenly everyone's wondering, like, oh wow, like, who is this person, right? Like, because nobody really asked who he was or what he does. So when we started talking to him, he's basically like an angel investor, and he buys companies. And he recently was in the news. His name is Babu Shivadasan, and he was in the Malayalam news for like, I think a couple of months over, because he invested about $18 million in a company here. So it's very important to respect everyone that you know. Like, at no point feel that you are above everybody else, or you're so successful in life that somebody's opinion doesn't matter. And even if it's a 5-year-old who's giving you advice, it's good to kind of just listen to it and give them their time. If you feel undervalued or underpaid, upskill yourself. This is something I tell people on my team when people complain and say, hey, you know what, somebody else is making more money than I am. They have a better salary package than I have. I want more money. If you feel that you don't, somebody on the team doesn't respect you, or a company that you work, is not giving you enough importance, or they're not paying you enough, it's not only the company's fault, it's your fault too. Make sure that you learn a new skill, and you probably were there with the company for 5 years and you learned nothing new. So the company felt that there was no value of giving you additional skills. If you go back and tell them, hey, you know what, I've learned the skill, here's how I can add value, and you make yourself important enough, you will always be one of those employees that get promotions and have that successful career path. So always look within for issues before you look at outside and think the world is a problem. Always say, what can you do to make it better? Understand and respect corporate policies. This is my favorite, because we don't like rules. Like I said, when I started this slide, I said we don't like rules. We don't like doing things a certain way. We don't like listening to people, right? But people do stupid things and they get fired for very simple things. So whatever job you get into, there's always like this first day you get this bunch of documents that you sign on, and one of that is always corporate policy. And it could be something as simple as don't play games on your computer laptop or office laptop, right? And people are like, how does it matter? Who's going to find out? But someday somebody's going to find out, and then you will lose your job. And this is why I said I've been part of conversations where I was like, why would somebody do like that, something like that, right? Like, why would somebody not lock their computer? So it's very important to kind of know that. One big thing is harassment, and especially in today's corporate culture, you can say something that might offend somebody, and you might feel that it's a joke, it's fine, but it essentially is not. So let me give you an example, right? Let's say 5 of us are sitting, and then I make a joke on somebody, and it could be not related to any of the 5 people in that group. I'm talking to my 5 friends, and I'm saying, hey, you know what? Um, I think I think the way that the girl has dressed is very funny, and I leave it at that. A 6th person who hears this conversation can report me, and most likely I will lose my job. So it's very important to kind of read the rule book of any job. Unless you start something of your own and you can set your own rules, because there's some things there's no second chances, and unfortunately that's the way of the world, right? So it's always important to read the fine print before investing, like finance experts always say, and that can keep you employed. The importance of financial planning, this is something that it's a lesson that I learned, and it's good to know. In my first job, I was in a position where I was earning a lot, and then I didn't really care about investing it anywhere. The only thing I made sure is I didn't spend more than what I earned. So that's something that once you start working, it's always very easy to get drifted to the fact that, hey, you know what, I'm independent, I'm making money, and then I can buy whatever I want. But always keep that in mind that your expenditure should be less than what you earn, because if you don't have that balance, after a while with credit cards and things like that, things can get really out of hand, and then you could spend the rest of your professional and personal life ruining those decisions. So always, when you start working, just always make sure that you have that kitty fund. In terms of some reason you lose your job or something happens, you get laid off, you always have something that you can kind of bank on. And this is the last thing, there's always a tree. So going back to this whole conversation about when the session started, when I said when I had nothing, and in my final year, I think the principal at that point told my parents that I was among the 10 worst students of the college, and not because that I have not bunked a single class in college, but just in terms of my grades. There's always a tree is something related to what the FBI does. So when the FBI trains new people, like new cadets, for their FBI college, right? The FBI's Federal Bureau of Investigation. They ask them a question on their first day, and the question is: you're stuck in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing that you can see. It's like a desert, and suddenly a tiger starts chasing you. And it's a very funny thing when I say this, but just keep this in mind. So the question is, what will you do? And then some will say, hey, I'll fight the tiger. Some will say, I will run and hide. And it's just like a plain desert, right? And then some will say, I don't know. I'll just let the tiger eat me. Somebody might say something funny. But the essence is, there's always a tree that you can climb. It's the fact that you have to look for that tree. It could be in your professional life. It could be in your personal life. It could be when you have a challenge. If you have a problem-solving mentality, you can essentially find a way through it. But if you give up on the fact that there's no solution available and there's nothing that can be done, I mean, again, I say it's on you. So there's always a way that you can find out. If nothing, like I say, if you start somewhere, if you start on a job that's totally unrelated to your experience, you can eventually get to where you want to be. But always remember that there's always a tree that you can climb. I think that's pretty much it. This is one of my favorite quotes, and the reason I left at the bottom is, when I went for that interview that landed me the job, I didn't want to go for that interview. It was a Friday evening, and then my friend said, "Hey, this interview is in Muvatupura. I'm going to Cochin. Do you want to go?" And I was like, "No." And my dad's like, "What are you going to do alone at home, right? Sure, you're studying for your engineering exams and stuff like that, but then, why don't you go and take a chance, like see what happens, right? Like at the worst case, you've traveled 4 hours for nothing." So this is something that it's a Michael Jordan quote too, where he says, "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Any opportunity you get, take it with both hands. Because if you feel there's going to be a better one, there's going to be another one. It might happen, it might not happen, but at least take your chance. Interview for every job that you can get. Don't just be picky and choosy and say, I'm just going to pick these top 2-3 companies. If I don't get there, I'm fine being sitting at home. because you'll most likely sit at home. All right. So, oops, sorry, my system got locked. I know it's about 10:45 for me, and I'm supposed to go to sleep, and I hope I haven't put you guys to sleep. But I'd like to give about 10-15 minutes for anybody who has any questions on anything, and if I can answer it, I will. Else, I'll kind of check on it and come back to you guys.
Yeah, Sajesh, it's over now. Presentation is over.
Yeah.
Okay. And everybody, please fill up one feedback form posted in the chat box. Use the second feedback form. Okay. Any queries? Please ask any questions.
Can you help us with getting good internships?
Sure. If you can tell me what area you're looking for, I can definitely kind of put you in touch with people. And again, it depends in terms of what area you want to do it, right? If it's with software engineering, yeah, probably I can check with that. If it's within electronics or something else, might have a little more hole. If it's something like mechanical or civil, not so much. But I can at least put you in touch with people who are looking for interns, and then you can go from there.
Okay, so can I contact you on LinkedIn?
Yeah, please. More than welcome. There's something called LinkedIn Open Networker, which means I accept everybody's invite on LinkedIn. So yeah, feel free to.
Thank you.
I'm not really good at networking. So Amal, are you not good at networking in terms of the technical aspects of networking, or you mean like connecting with people? And I think the best way to do is just ask me the question right now.
Yes.
I'm in connecting with people.
I'm sorry, with people?
Yeah, I'm in connecting with people, yes.
It's so, I have to put you on the spot, right? But what are your interests? What do you like? What are your hobbies?
In technology stacks,
Just in general, as a person, what are your hobbies?
as my hobby, I like coding. That's just one of my hobbies. Like,
I'm
ripping
sorry,
out
you- I'm sorry, your voice is breaking.
ripping down websites,
Okay.
coding.
But I'm saying outside of that, as a person, right? Like I'm sure you'd have some general interest. Like for example, for
Yeah.
me, anybody who knows me knows that I am a big football fan, and I'm a big Arsenal fan. Like I've been supporting the club for 22 years. So most conversations are like, "Wow, you're an Arsenal fan," or like, "Wow, you're an Arsenal fan," right? So it's essentially picking areas of interest that you have, and it could be movies, it could be sport, it could be coding, it could be anything that's under the sun. Look for those forums, and you'll be able to kind of find those people, like-minded people.
Okay.
But the point is you start at somewhere. So what I would say or suggest is go back to LinkedIn or get on LinkedIn. Start with the people you know, like the 100 or the 89 people now that we have, right? If you can find the list of people who are shining, just kind of get that list, add every single person. You suddenly have 100 connections.
Yeah.
And then there's other ways to kind of become a LinkedIn open network and connect with people. So if you get 100 people, that means you're connected to 10,000 people automatically.
Okay, that's cool.
So what can I do to improve is just start. You start doing it, you will improve.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm here to give a vote of thanks. I'm really glad that we had such a great opportunity to attend with one of our alumni of our college. She succeeded in achieving something in life. So it was a great inspiration to have you here so that even we got an impression that we can build a successful career. So thank you for coming here and sharing your experiences, stories, and opinions with us. It was really stimulating, and thank you to the Alumni Association and PAT Department for arranging such an enlightening webinar. Thank you all.
Once more, Sajesh, we can wind up now.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to do this.
Yeah, once more, I give a big thanks to you on behalf of Jyoti Engineering College and Alumni Association. and then you express it's an excellent talk. I mean, to giving an excellent coverage to career opportunities to our students. Thank you so much for sharing your valuable time to us. Thank you, Satish. Yeah, the Primal is 1 minute, Satish. Primal, the Primal.
Yeah, hi.
Primal is.
Hello.
Hey, hi. Hey, hi everyone. Hi, Sudeep. Very nice session actually. I was listening to this one. It's always nice to catch same bachelor in the call that was technology director from Google. So it was a nice session and inspiring to all. And I think definitely like our people also are good engineering students also would have been like that actually. So taking as an inspiration and sky is the limit and I'll go further actually. All the best to everyone. And it was nice session, Sajeev.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all the participants for attending this webinar.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Stay safe.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye. Stay safe. Bye.